When we think of a deadly outbreak, our minds go straight to Hollywood tropes, glowing vials and underground bunkers, and pathogens that wipe out a city block in minutes. But the things most likely to actually kill you aren't locked in a subterranean vault. They sit in your grocery store, living in your local hospital, or waiting in your own backyard. This gap between cinematic horror and domestic reality creates a persistent distortion in how we perceive danger. We often focus on the exotic outliers, while the statistical heavyweights operate in the background of our daily lives. To rank the true top 10 biological threats on U.S. soil, we have to make a choice about how we measure danger. Do we rank them by case fatality rate, meaning how efficiently a germ kills one individual who gets infected? Or do we rank them by mortality burden, how many Americans it actually puts in the ground every single year? Prioritizing cinematic anomalies over statistical heavyweights creates a dangerous blind spot. We end up ignoring the very diseases that are actively shortening American lifespans right now. We are going to plot these biological threats on a threat quadrant. The horizontal axis tracks total annual U.S. deaths, stretching past 50,000. The vertical axis represents your likelihood of death if infected, rising to a 100% guarantee of death at the top. By mapping these threats, we can separate our anxiety from statistical truth and see exactly where our fear actually aligns with reality. Let's start up in the top left corner. Rank 10 is variant Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and rank 9 is Naegleria fowleri, the brain-eating amoeba. Both sit at the peak of our chart because they are almost 100% fatal. Getting infected requires highly specific inputs. You have to consume infected beef products or force warm, untreated lake water deep up your nose. If that happens, the outcome is rapid, irreversible brain destruction. Right next to them is rank 8, rabies. The input here is getting bitten by an infected animal and choosing to ignore the immediate post-exposure vaccine. Once rabies symptoms appear, your margin for survival drops to 0. But because our modern vaccine protocols are highly effective, the annual death toll in the U.S. barely registers on our horizontal axis. These are apex killers, but because they are incredibly rare on American soil, the mental effort spent fearing them is a statistical waste. Now we drop down to rank 7, vector-borne diseases like Lyme and West Nile. Notice how we are moving down the fatality axis, but creeping to the right in total cases. Tick endemic zones have expanded significantly over the last decade, doubling reported infection rates. You are much less likely to die acutely from a tick bite, but you trade that risk for severe, long-term degradation in your quality of life. Sliding further right, we hit the foodborne trinity. Rank 6 is norovirus, rank 5 is Campylobacter, and rank 4 is Salmonella. The sheer volume of infections here is staggering. These pathogens cause 48 million illnesses every single year. Out of those cases, about 3,000 Americans die annually, with Salmonella driving the vast majority of the fatalities. This image shows the microscopic reality of the threats living right in our kitchens. These pink, rod-shaped bacteria are a visual example of the ubiquitous pathogens clinging to the food we eat. Because these bacteria permeate our entire food supply chain, washing your hands and cooking your meat perfectly only mitigates a fraction of the risk. We rely heavily on systemic agricultural oversight to keep us safe. Rank 3 brings us to a biological irony, C. diff. Look at how far right this dot lands, representing at least 12,800 deaths every year. Widespread antibiotic use in medicine and agriculture wipes out the natural protective bacteria in your gut. We create the exact internal environment the pathogen needs to multiply and kill the patient. And that leads directly to rank 2, antibiotic-resistant superbugs, like MRSA and highly resistant strains of strep A. This is a 3D rendering of strep bacteria. Pathogens like these, which have evolved to defeat our best medicines, cause more than 2.8 million resistant infections and nearly 36,000 deaths in the U.S. annually. Tracking these evolved-in strains requires a massive, continuous effort in laboratories worldwide. Researchers are constantly culturing samples just to see which drugs still work. Our greatest medical defense, antibiotics, carries a heavy biological tax. As global resistance grows, checking into a hospital for a routine procedure is increasingly becoming a lethal gamble. Finally, we reach rank 1, COVID-19. It lands on the extreme right of our matrix, completely dwarfing the mortality numbers of the other biological agents. Unlike eating tainted meat or wandering into a tick-infested forest, the input mechanism here is simply breathing shared air. It relies entirely on routine social interaction and efficient airborne transmission. Even in its weakened endemic state, the outcome data is undeniable. In 2023 alone, it still caused nearly 50,000 deaths. These charts show the leading causes of death in 2023. You can see COVID-19 retaining its spot in the top 10 for both men and women, holding its own alongside chronic systemic killers like heart disease, cancer, and stroke. We have normalized our deadliest active pathogen. As a society, we've accepted tens of thousands of baseline casualties as a permanent trade-off for returning to normal life. The highly publicized agents kept locked behind the walls of the CDC are terrifying, but the reality is they do not represent the true everyday biological risks faced by the general American public. To figure out what you actually need to do, we built a risk profile matrix. If you fall into the outdoorsman profile, stop worrying about rabies. The true threat is tick-borne disease, demanding rigorous tick checks after every hike. If you are an elderly or surgical patient, the hospital itself is the threat zone. This demands aggressive antibiotic stewardship and vigilant wound care to avoid superbugs. For the general public, long-term defense shifts towards metabolic health. Since chronic disease acts as the primary enabler of viral complications, the most effective preventative actions happen outside the pharmacy. By filtering out the cinematic Hollywood tropes and sticking strictly to the actuarial data, you can finally stop fighting phantom threats. This refocuses your energy on the true endemic killers that actually dictate the length and quality of an American life.